The silence inside the church was deafening. All eyes were on me, the bride who, moments ago, was about to say the expected yes. But that was not what came out of my mouth. "No," the murmur spread among the guests. The priest froze, holding the prayer book. My mother brought her hands to her face, horrified. On the other side, my fiancé, the man I had loved for so long, blinked rapidly as if he didn't understand what had just happened. The best man beside him, his best friend, looked away, his hand sweating as he held the ring that was supposed to be passed to the groom just seconds before. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision I had made. It almost feels like I'm in an episode of blind love, where people decide whether or not to get married in front of everyone. Well, maybe I've been blind until now. More murmurs. Some guests were fiddling with their phones, perhaps already spreading the bombshell on social media. I could hear my sister sitting in the first row, trying to stifle a nervous laugh. We both knew what would come next. I could look at my fiancé now and tell everyone the reason behind my no. I could end this charade right here in front of all these wide eyes. But no. First, you need to understand how I got here, because just a few hours ago, I was simply a happy woman, in love, ready to say yes to the man of my dreams. Or at least, that's what I thought. If you'd asked me yesterday, I would have said my fiancé was the most wonderful man in the world. Gavin had always been the kind of man that everyone wanted, thoughtful, romantic, successful, and the kind of person who made anyone feel special. From our very first date, he seemed to know exactly what to say and when to say it. He'd surprise me with flowers in the middle of the day, hidden notes around the house, and those "good night, my princess" messages that made me sigh like a lovesick teenager. Our friends said I was lucky, that Gavin was different from other men, that he was devoted, faithful, incapable of hurting anyone. And I believed them. How could I not believe it? He was the perfect fiancé. I remember the time I got sick and he dropped everything to take care of me. He made soup, covered me with a soft blanket, and spent the whole night holding my hand. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here," he said, and I believed him. And how could I forget our trips? The first time we went to the beach together, he picked me up in his arms and ran toward the water while I screamed and laughed at the same time. He always made sure to make me smile, as if my happiness were the most important mission in his life. But maybe what won me over the most was the way he looked at me, as if I were the most beautiful woman in the world, as if I were everything. I truly thought I had found the love of my life. But now, standing at the altar, with everyone's eyes on me, I realized that I never really knew Gavin, and that all this talk of perfection was just an illusion I created myself. The big day had arrived. I should have been happy, and on the outside, I seemed to be. The white dress fit perfectly on my body, my hair was flawless, and the makeup highlighted every detail of my face. But inside, something felt wrong. A tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. "It's just normal nerves," I told myself. After all, it's not every day you make the decision to spend the rest of your life with someone. My sister Laura noticed my tension and tried to cheer me up. "Hey, breathe! Everything's going to be fine. Gavin loves you, and this is going to be the happiest day of your life." I smiled at her, but something inside me still felt unsettled. When the car arrived at the church, my mother was crying with emotion, and my father helped me out, holding my hand proudly. The perfect wedding I had always dreamed of was just a few steps away. The red carpet stretched out before me. The guests were seated in their places, and Gavin was waiting at the altar with a confident smile. But that tightness in my chest was still there. Before entering, I looked at my sister and said, "I need to go to the bathroom." Laura's eyes widened. "Now?" Just a minute. I'll be right back. She hesitated but nodded and followed me to the back of the church. My heart raced for no apparent reason, as if something was about to happen. And then I saw it. A semi-open door, an image that made me freeze in place. In there, Gavin was kissing the best man. My world came crashing down in an instant. My feet were glued to the ground. I wanted to move, wanted to blink, wanted to do anything, but my body simply wouldn't obey. Gavin was there, just a few feet away from me, kissing the best man. His best friend. The man who had been standing at the altar, waiting for me, was now exchanging hidden caresses in the back of the church with another man on the very day of our wedding. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Laura, beside me, widened her eyes and brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp of surprise. Her gaze met mine, and I realized she didn't know how to react either. My hands were shaking. My thoughts were racing in every direction, trying to understand, trying to justify, trying to find some explanation that made sense. But all I could see was the raw truth before me. And the worst part? I never suspected anything. Gavin and Brandon were inseparable. Since the beginning of our relationship, they had always been very close, but I never thought anything was strange about it. In fact, I admired their friendship. Every Sunday, they'd go fishing together. It was a hobby they shared since their teenage years, something I never questioned. Once a week, they also went out for drinks after work. Brandon had a girlfriend, a woman he always made sure to bring to our couple's gatherings. It seemed like a perfect relationship, just like mine with Gavin. Now it all made sense. Now I understood so much. The reason for some phone calls taken away from me. The reason for those sudden business trips. The reason for some excuses that once seemed harmless. I felt stupid. The man I was about to marry had been leading a double life right under my nose, and I never saw the signs. Laura grabbed my arm tightly, as if she feared I would collapse right there, but I was already falling apart inside. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice heavy with shock and anger. I didn't know. My mind was spinning nonstop. Instinctively, I grabbed my sister's phone and, without thinking much, I started recording. I needed proof. If he ever tried to make me doubt what I had seen, I would have this recording to remind me of the truth. A whirlwind of emotions consumed me. Anger, shame, sadness, betrayal. My instinct was to open that door and throw the truth in their faces, in front of all the guests. But something inside me hesitated. Did I really want to expose everything now, in the heat of the moment? In front of our parents, our friends, people who would never imagine such a scene? "We can't let this go," Laura insisted. "He deceived you, made a fool out of you. You can't just walk into that church and pretend nothing happened." The problem was, I couldn't just run out of there either. The words were stuck in my throat. I felt an inexplicable emptiness. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the irrational need to find an explanation. I wanted to look into Gavin's eyes and hear from his own mouth why. I wanted to understand when I became a plan B, a smokescreen for a forbidden love. "I'm going to marry him." Laura stared at me as if I had lost my mind. "What?" I swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking clearly, but one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't leaving there as a victim. If anyone was going to be humiliated at this wedding, it wouldn't be me. "I need to talk to him first. I need to see how he reacts." Laura ran her hands over her face, frustrated. "This is crazy." Maybe it was. But I felt like there was still something that needed to be said. The music began to play, and all the guests stood up. The big moment had arrived. Laura was still looking at me with concern, but she didn't say anything more. She knew my decision had been made. I took my father's arm and started walking down the aisle. My feet seemed to float, but not from happiness. It was as if I were approaching a cliff. At the altar, Gavin was waiting for me with that same confident smile he always had. The smile that once made me feel safe. Now, it seemed like nothing but a mask. And Brandon, standing next to him, avoided making eye contact with me. Of course, I was marrying his boyfriend. Each step felt like a test of my sanity. My breath was irregular, and the memory of what I had seen in the back of the church pulsed in my mind like a red alert. Finally, I reached the altar. Gavin took my hand and looked into my eyes. "You look beautiful," he whispered. If it had been a few days ago, my heart would have raced with emotion. Now, all I felt was disgust. The priest began the ceremony, but I could barely hear his words. My eyes were fixed on Gavin, analyzing every detail. How could he be standing there, in front of me, as if nothing had happened? How could he be so cold? "Gavin, do you take—" The priest was speaking, but I wasn't hearing anything. Everything was a distant hum, until it was my turn. "And you? Do you take Gavin to be your husband?" The room fell into absolute silence. Everyone was waiting for my response. My heart was pounding, my mouth went dry. Gavin looked at me, waiting for the confirmation. And then, finally, I knew what to do. I took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eyes. "No!" The silence in the church was absolute. The no still hung in the air like a bomb ready to explode. Everyone stared at me, shocked, waiting for an explanation. My mother placed her hands over her mouth, horrified. My father furrowed his brow, confused. The guests murmured amongst themselves, trying to understand what had just happened. Gavin blinked several times, as if his brain was taking a moment to process. "What?" he finally asked, a nervous smile on his face. "Honey, is this some kind of joke?" Joke. The irony made me laugh, a bitter laugh that echoed through the altar. "Want to know why I said no?" My voice came out firm, but I was trembling inside. "Because I refuse to marry a liar." The murmuring among the guests grew louder. Some people pulled out their phones, probably recording everything. Gavin tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "What are you saying?" he asked, trying to keep calm. I took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I'm saying I saw you, Gavin. I saw you with Brandon. I saw you two together before the ceremony." The entire church went into shock. There was a gasp from one of the bridesmaids. Gavin's face went pale, and Brandon froze. For the first time, he looked directly at me, his eyes wide with pure terror. "This is crazy!" Gavin tried to laugh, but his voice faltered. "You're making things up." Without saying a word, I grabbed my sister's phone. With a simple tap on the screen, the video started to play. The image of Gavin and Brandon kissing appeared in high definition for everyone to see. The impact was instant. Some people screamed in surprise, others covered their mouths, shocked. Gavin's mother nearly fainted. I stared at him, watching his world crumble before everyone's eyes. There was no turning back. Now, everyone knew the truth. Chaos overtook the church. The guests were in shock, some murmuring, not knowing where to hide their faces, others just watching as if they were seeing a live soap opera. The priest adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, unsure of how to react. My mother stood up from the pew, completely frozen, and Gavin's father stared at his son as if he didn't even recognize him anymore. Gavin took a step back, his eyes wide, unable to form a coherent sentence. Brandon, as pale as a ghost, lowered his head, avoiding the gazes now fixed on them. It was then that I heard someone whisper, "That was cruel. She shouldn't have exposed him like that." That ignited a fury within me. Everyone says we shouldn't out anyone, but he betrayed me, lied to me. He was a liar. My voice echoed through the hall. If I had seen him with a woman, I would have done the same. My indignation is above everything. Gavin mumbled something, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. The problem isn't that you like men, Gavin. The problem is that you used me as a smokescreen to hide who you really are. You made a fool out of me. You made a fool out of our friends. You made our families believe all of this was real when it was all just a lie. His eyes were red, full of tears that he was trying to hold back. He was speechless. His mother sobbed in a corner. His father simply closed his eyes and shook his head. The weight of the truth had fallen on everyone. I adjusted my dress, lifted my head, and turned my back. "Congratulations, Gavin. Now you're free." And with that, I walked out of the church with my head held high, leaving behind a marriage that should never have happened. The fresh air outside the church was like a punch of reality. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had just happened. My heart was still racing, but not from fear. Laura rushed to catch up with me. "Oh my God, you were legendary in there," she said, trying to hold back a nervous smile. "But are you okay?" I allowed myself a short, tired laugh. Still processing everything, but yeah, I'm fine. The guests began to slowly exit the church. Some looked at me with expressions of sympathy. Others clearly didn't know how to react. I saw my mother approaching, still trying to understand what had just happened, while my father seemed ready to explode with anger. But before anyone else, Gavin appeared. He was different. The confident shine he always carried was gone. Now what I saw was a man defeated, broken by his own lies. "Let me explain," he pleaded, his voice cracking. I crossed my arms, keeping my gaze firm. "Now you want to talk? After making me believe I was the love of your life? After lying to me all this time?" He sighed, running his hands over his face. "I didn't want to hurt you. I tried to be the person you deserved, but I couldn't be who I'm not." I felt a tightness in my chest. Part of me wanted to believe there was a hint of truth in his words, but the pain of betrayal still burned like a coal. "You know what hurts me the most, Gavin?" My voice came out softer but firm. "It's not the fact that you're gay. It's the fact that you used me as a shield. You could have been honest. I would have understood, but you chose to make me a lie." He lowered his head, unable to respond. Laura held my hand, gently pulling me to leave. I sighed one last time and looked at Gavin. "I hope one day you find the courage to be who you really are, but I won't be the victim of this story." And without looking back, I walked toward my future, leaving Gavin and everything he represented behind. Months passed since that day. At first, it was hard, facing curious stares, whispers, gossip headlines spreading on social media. Some people called me brave, others said I was cruel. But in the end, none of that mattered. What mattered was that I was at peace. I started my life over from scratch. I began dedicating time to myself, to my work, to the things that made me happy before Gavin. I went to therapy, traveled alone, rediscovered parts of myself that had been forgotten in a relationship that was never real, and most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. Gavin? I never spoke to him again. Even for the sale of the apartment we had bought together, I preferred to stay completely away. I sent my sister and my lawyer to handle everything without exchanging a single word with him. I heard rumors that he moved to another city with his boyfriend and best friend. Maybe trying to start over. Maybe trying to escape his own shame. I don't know. And honestly, I don't care. Everyone follows their own path, and mine no longer has space for lies. Today, sitting in a cafe, I observe the world around me and realize how much I've grown, how much stronger I've become, how much I've learned that, sometimes, a no can be the most liberating thing in the world. And as I take a sip of my coffee, I smile to myself, because now I know. Saying no at that altar wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning.